One word, just two letters. Okay. On the 27th of March, 1977, that word killed 583 people. It remains the deadliest aviation disaster in history, and not a single mechanical part failed. Two Boeing 747s, the largest passenger aircraft on the planet at the time, collided on a fog-bound runway in the Canary Islands. One belonged to KLM Royal Dutch Airlines, the other to Pan American World Airways. Between them, they carried more than 600 souls. What destroyed them was not fire, not metal fatigue, not a storm. It was a misunderstanding, a garbled radio exchange, a word swallowed by static. This is the story of how a terrorist bomb, a traffic jam of jumbo jets, a legendary pilot's ego, and a two-letter confirmation combined into the worst air disaster the world has ever seen. It began with a phone call. That afternoon, local separatists detonated a small bomb inside a flower shop at Gran Canaria Airport. The explosion injured several people, but killed no one. A second threat followed, and authorities shut the airport down immediately. Dozens of inbound flights were rerouted to Los Rodeos Airport on the neighboring island of Tenerife, a small regional field with a single runway never designed to handle this kind of traffic. By mid-afternoon, the apron was choked with jumbo jets parked wingtip to wingtip. Then the weather turned. A wall of fog rolled down from the mountains. Visibility dropped to fewer than 300 meters. The control tower could not see either end of the runway. Too many planes, too little space, and zero visibility. Among the passengers aboard the KLM flight was a Dutch woman named Robina van Lanschot. During the long wait on the ground, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She chose to stay on the island rather than reboard the aircraft. Out of 248 people on that plane, she was the only person to step off before it moved. She was the only one who survived. The captain of KLM Flight 4805 was not just any pilot. Jacob Veldhuizen van Zanten was the most prominent aviator in the Netherlands. He had more than 11,000 hours of flight time, and he was the chief instructor at KLM for the 747. He was the man who certified other pilots to fly the aircraft. His face appeared in the airline's advertisements. He was a symbol of trust. But that afternoon, trust became pressure. KLM had strict crew duty time regulations, and the clock was running out. If Van Zanten did not get airborne soon, his crew would exceed their legal hours. The passengers would be stranded overnight, and KLM would face penalties. He had already added 35 minutes to the delay by refueling on Tenerife, rather than waiting for Gran Canaria. He wanted to be ready for an instant departure. Inside the cockpit, the hierarchy was absolute. Just before the aircraft began its takeoff roll, flight engineer Willem Schroeder raised a concern. He asked whether Pan Am had actually cleared the runway. Van Zanten dismissed it instantly. In the rigid cockpit culture of the 1970s, a subordinate did not challenge this captain twice. Schroeder had done what few would dare. But the system around him was not built to hear it. Here is where seconds decided everything. Air traffic control devised an improvised plan to clear the gridlock. Both aircraft would taxi up the single runway. KLM would go first, reach the far end, turn around, and hold for takeoff clearance. Pan Am would follow part way, then exit at a taxiway called the third intersection, clearing the path. But the fog was so thick that Pan Am's crew could not find the right exit. They passed it. They were still on the runway. KLM's first officer then radioed the tower with an ambiguous message, telling them the aircraft was at takeoff. The The phrasing was dangerously unclear. Were they in position, or were they actually rolling? In standard phraseology, the word takeoff should never be used except in the final clearance itself. The tower did not catch the error. The controller responded with a route clearance and told KLM to stand by. At almost the exact same instant, Pan Am radioed that they were still on the runway. And this is the moment that sealed everything. Both transmissions hit the frequency simultaneously. When two radio signals overlap, they produce a heterodyne, a shrill whine that wipes out both messages. Inside the KLM cockpit, the crew heard only one fragment through the static, the word "okay." Van Zanten had heard what he wanted to hear. He released the brakes. 4 engines spooled to full power. The 747, heavy with fuel, began accelerating down the runway, directly toward Pan Am. Pan Am's captain saw the KLM landing lights burning through the fog at the last possible moment. He tried to steer off the runway. Van Zanten, realizing the obstacle ahead, pulled back on the yoke so hard the tail scraped the ground. The KLM jet actually left the ground for an instant, but the landing gear and engines tore through the midsection of the American aircraft at roughly 140 knots. The impact ripped Pan Am nearly in half. KLM slammed back onto the runway 150 meters beyond, skidded, and exploded. All 248 people aboard KLM perished. On Pan Am, 335 of the 396 on board were killed. 61 survivors escaped through breaks in the fuselage before fire consumed the wreckage. The aftermath of Tenerife forced the aviation industry to confront an uncomfortable truth. The greatest danger in a cockpit was not mechanical, it was human. This tragedy forever changed how pilots fly and how they speak to one another. Tenerife gave birth to crew resource management, commonly called CRM, a philosophy that restructured how flight crews communicate. In a modern cockpit, the captain's authority is no longer absolute. Under CRM, every crew member is trained to speak up when something feels wrong, regardless of rank. A first officer's doubt is no longer a mere suggestion. It is a procedural obligation that the captain is required to answer. The language barrier and the death of OK. The International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, overhauled radio phraseology to prevent another garbled exchange. The word takeoff was banned from all communications except for the final clearance itself. For every other reference, controllers and pilots now use the word departure. The informal OK was replaced by strict readback protocols. Every clearance must now be repeated verbatim to ensure it was heard correctly. The disaster highlighted a critical flaw. The controllers in the tower were blind in the fog. This led to the widespread implementation of ground radar, ASDE, allowing controllers to see every movement on the runway, even in zero visibility. Later, advanced safety layers were added, such as runway intersection warning systems, RIWS, and controllable stop bars, red lights across taxiways that physically block an aircraft until a dispatcher provides a clear path. These changes have saved an incalculable number of lives. Every time a first officer challenges a senior captain, Tenerife is the reason. Every time a controller says departure instead of takeoff, 583 ghosts are the reason. The lessons of 1977 ensured that while the fog may still descend, the world is no longer flying blind. What happened on that runway was not an accident in the way we usually understand the word. It was a cascade of small, survivable errors, any one of which, removed from the chain, would have prevented the disaster entirely. A bomb that hurt no one. A fog bank that arrived at the worst possible hour. A captain too proud and too pressured to wait. A word, okay, lost in static. This was one of the most terrible tragedies in aviation history. Not because it was extraordinary, but because it was so terrifyingly ordinary. Ordinary people doing ordinary jobs, making ordinary mistakes. We can only hope and work to ensure that nothing like it ever happens again.